Sometimes I spend a couple of days writing and don't bother to get out of my pajamas, and I find that a bit offensive. For goodness sake, get dressed to work. But I do go into other people's workplaces, and like I go to the Spin-Off sometimes, and they do this great thing on Fridays. They've got a letterbox, and during the week, if somebody does something that you think is fabulous, you write it on a piece of paper and put it in the letterbox. And on Fridays, they draw out a name, and whoever is the first name drawn out gets a prize.
Oh my goodness! And they've got beanbags and everything, have they?
No, I don't think Google. No, it's a normal place. They're normal people. But all of the little notes get read out, so you get affirmed by your workmates for something that you might have done, which is great.
Why don't we do that?
I don't know. Let's do that. Should we do it now?
Why don't we do that? Let's start that. Gary, what about you?
Well, two things. First of all, I'm like Michelle. I'm self-employed and work from home, and I miss the workplace, I have to say, and I miss the banter and the when in the mayor's office we had the same team for nearly 9 years, and boy, the banter there was just fabulous, and we're all still friends. And I remember Pam coming in one time and saying, the way you and Linda talk to each other is disgusting, and neither of us realised it. But the other thing too is some of these sort of modern workplaces, open workplaces, where you go in and you think, oh my God, somebody's died. It's sort of hushed and respectful, and I could never cope.
No,
I am so noisy. And my phone rings all the time. You can hear me 2 blocks away, and so that would be, I'd say, I'd be awful to live with.
Yes.
And I would be awful in the other way, because I just need I need to be in a really quiet space to be able to work. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I turn the music off, turn the radio off, turn everything off if I'm actually writing a thing, as opposed to doing a spreadsheet or replying to emails. But yeah, I find it really difficult to be in a room with other people, and I can't deal with interruptions.
It's so funny, isn't it, Gary? Because it's a real love-hate, because when I left the radio station, when I first moved for Auckland and got the job, and I left that and I went contracting for a while, the first thing I missed, waking up on a Monday morning and hearing that silence and the lack of camaraderie. I missed so much of the first couple of months. It was just like, what am I going to do without that camaraderie, you know?
Exactly. And it's the banter, and so I was just thinking recently about one of my work colleagues. I saw his death notice in the paper yesterday, and I thought of the banter that came in our office all the time, and it was just constant. And we all worked really hard, but we all knew each other's soft spots, and we all knew which ones to push. It was just great. And we socialised together, and we worked together, and it was just fabulous. It really was. I really enjoyed it.
Well, I don't know if I'm, sort of putting the cat amongst the pigeons and letting too much information out on RNZ, but our big office thing is thermostat issues.
Oh, men like it colder, women like it warmer.
Every hour we complain, we gripe, don't we, Ali? It's all over the place. Cold, hot, turn it up, turn it down.
Down here we just use a jumper.
Yep, there you go.
Yeah, what you need is a big hot bowl of locust pasta.
Yes, that's right.
It'll keep you cosy.
And mung beans.
Gary, you've been great on a Friday. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to Ali for putting the week together. I'm Ross Chapman, back with you 3:45 Monday afternoon. Can't wait. See you then.
Kia ora, o te porokaramu no te ai. It's Varaire, Friday on Cook Islands Language Week. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. Good evening, I'm Alex Perrottet. Tonight, the death of a 2-month-old girl raises questions on heavy drinking while breastfeeding as a community leader renews calls for a state of emergency to be called in Northland. Another climate change message goes out. Eat less meat and dairy if you want to help save the planet. Gosh, can we heat it? 19 people arrested and 5 train services disrupted in Christchurch as activists sit down on the tracks to protest coal. And on another train last night, a conductor wins applause for stopping a service for 20 minutes to deal with a racist passenger. And speaking of black and white, it's the 50th anniversary of the Beatles Abbey Road album with that iconic photo on that zebra crossing.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. An Otago University researcher says there's no way of knowing whether messages about avoiding drinking while breastfeeding are getting through to mums. 2-month-old Sapphire Rose Williams died in January 2017, and a coroner has found her death was most likely due to high levels of alcohol in her mother's breast milk. The Ministry of Health says breastfeeding mums should avoid alcohol, but if they do have a few drinks, they shouldn't feed their baby for at least a couple of hours. But Shirley Parakal from Otago's Department of Preventative and Social Medicine says there's no data about whether that message is getting passed on to mums.
Whether this is getting communicated by health professionals, maybe the midwives in the early stages of pregnancy, the plunket nurses later on, and the GPs to the woman, is something we do not know for New Zealand.
While the coroner, Deborah Bell, didn't make any specific recommendations, she stressed the importance of breastfeeding mothers avoiding alcohol at any stage. The police say a drug bust in Auckland last week was one of the largest seizures of methamphetamine ever here. 2 British nationals were arrested after the police seized more than 200 kilograms worth almost $150 million at a central Auckland apartment. One of the men was arrested at Auckland Airport trying to flee the country. The search was part of Operation Essex, which is targeting members of an overseas criminal organisation working here. Detective Inspector Paul Newman says it's a significant seizure.
Wastewater analysis are telling us that this country uses between 15 and 16 kilograms of methamphetamine a week. This seizure represents about 4 months' national supply around our communities.
Meanwhile, the police believe the packages of cocaine that washed up on a West Auckland beach earlier this week were once destined for Australia. 20 packages worth more than $3 million came ashore at Bethel's Beach. In August last year, a rigid inflatable boat was spotted by patrols off the northern New South Wales coast, heading towards the mainland. The police say the 2 occupants were seen offloading packages of cocaine into the sea before they were arrested. Most of it was recovered, washed up on the Australian coastline from northern Queensland down to New South Wales. The police say the markings and packaging of the Bethel's Beach drugs are consistent with those. The Associate Environment Minister is rejecting claims a proposal designed to reduce waste will put the costs up for consumers. Eugenie Sage has unveiled a proposal scheme to hold certain businesses responsible for putting in place a plan for recycling or disposing their goods. For example, they could put a levy on their product, which would be returned to the consumer if they recycled. The National Party says it will put up costs, but Ms Sage says that's not what has happened overseas.
Instead of using nature as a receptacle for waste or offloading the costs onto councils and communities to collect fast food packaging, for example, when it's left all over the street, it means that brand owners, retailers all contribute to those costs.
Eugenie Sage says consultation closes in early October. A cordon at the scene where a homeless man was killed in a hit and run in Christchurch has been lifted following a blessing this afternoon. Dean Michael Ames, who was 46, died after being struck by a stolen van in New Brighton on Wednesday. The police say their investigation on Shaw Avenue has been completed. Meanwhile, they say they've received numerous tips from the public on the whereabouts of fugitive Liam Strickland, who's being sought over the hit and run. A person has been taken to hospital in a critical condition after a possible shooting in South Auckland. Emergency services were called to a property in Otara just after 3 this afternoon. The police found a man at the Billington Avenue address with a serious leg wound. Cordons are being set up on the street and are expected to remain in place this evening while a scene examination is carried out. A Huntly mother says her family has been left traumatised following an early morning police raid. Cheryl Martinger says her young children were left scared and frightened when they were woken up by police, who soon discovered the offender, who is known to her, wasn't living there. Ms Martinger says prior to the raid she had a good relationship with the police and had been in a hui with the police the day before to talk about pastoral care and the community. She says they aren't the only family who feel they've been hurt by police raids.
We've had people come over home and talk about their experience and said that they wish that they had the courage to stand up to the police, even though they were raided for nothing. Like, they were found, nothing was found, yet their kids had to live through that.
The police say the search warrant was pre-planned and related to a person they are seeking surrounding serious offending in the Huntly community. They say they didn't find the person. A two-car crash has blocked part of State Highway 1 near Waikuku, north of Christchurch. The police say the crash on Main North Road near the Ashley River blocked the northbound lane. One person has moderate injuries. It's coming up to 5:05. It's not only his own side that Warriors coach Stephen Kenny will be keeping an eye on in the NRL match against Manly in Auckland tonight. The Warriors' playoff hopes are dangling by a thread as they languish in 12th spot on the ladder, trying to avoid a club record 7th successive loss at Mount Smart. While that's Kenny's immediate concern, he's already thinking about next season's squad, and a target is Manly hooker Api Koroisau as a likely replacement for the veteran Isaac Luke.
Part of us improving our playing roster is, making sure that we're getting the right player, whether it's from an ability point of view, character point of view, and someone who has experience like Api of that calibre is certainly an attraction.
Meanwhile, former NRL and Kangaroo star Valentine Holmes has made an impressive debut in the NFL for the New York Jets. Despite a 31-22 loss, Holmes showed glimpses of the soft hands and speed that made him a star in rugby league. The New Zealand left-arm spinner Ajaz Patel says the current three-day game against a Sri Lankan board 11 will be invaluable ahead of next week's first test. Sri Lanka's resumption on 323 for 6 in their first innings has been delayed due to poor weather. Patel took 5 wickets on the opening day but says it will still take a while to get used to the local conditions.
It does take a bit of acclimatisation and a bit of time to adjust. Obviously the boys have been over in the UK, totally different conditions, different wickets, so it's nice to get out here, get a run into the series and then, take it on the head.
Ajaz Patel. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Country Life has a new reporter from the Pacific. Blam 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 of the Friday Night Live act, and the chemist Nicola Gaston celebrates her favourite element, gallium. The first one predicted by Mendeleev's periodic table ahead of its actual discovery, which, because of the role it plays in producing light of a certain wavelength, ties in nicely with a sonic tonic dedicated to the colour blue, on Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For the northern half of the North Island, from Taranaki and Taupo northwards, including Bay of Plenty, occasional rain or showers, but long fine spells as well. Heavy falls and thunderstorms are possible from tomorrow afternoon. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, mainly fine tonight, but a few showers inland. Showers becoming widespread and heavy tomorrow, with possible thunderstorms from tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne and northern Hawke's Bay, scattered rain clearing this evening, mainly fine tomorrow. Central and southern Hawke's Bay also wide as upper, mainly fine tonight. Showers tomorrow, possibly heavy, thundery about the ranges. For Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, fine tonight. Occasional rain tomorrow. Snow to 800 metres for a time. Canterbury and North Otago, rain setting in this evening. Some heavy falls tomorrow with snow above 300 metres. Central Otago, Dunedin and Clutha, a few showers tonight. Scattered rain tomorrow, falling as snow above 300 metres. And Southland, cloudy periods and a few showers. Chatham Islands, showers clearing tomorrow. RNZ National, 8.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks very much, Susanna. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. It's Friday. The death of a baby girl whose mother breastfed her after drinking heavily has put the spotlight on whether the message is clear enough about the dangers of consuming alcohol while breastfeeding. 2-month-old Sapphire Rose Williams died in January 2017, and a coroner has just found her death was most likely due to high levels of alcohol in her mother's breast milk. Our social issues reporter Sarah Robson has more.
In her findings, coroner Deborah Bell couldn't ascertain the exact cause of baby Sapphire's death. But she said toxicology tests revealed the amount of alcohol in her blood to be 6 times the legal blood alcohol limit for driving. Sapphire's mother, Janice Tua, had been drinking the night before her baby died, consuming 18 cans of pre-mixed bourbon and cola. And Ms. Tua accepts the alcohol in Sapphire's system would have come from her breast milk. At the time of her death, Sapphire's whānau was homeless and they were living with family in Northland, waiting for Housing New Zealand to assign them a house. Ricky Houghton from He Korowai Trust says the baby's death is tragic.
She's an innocent victim of families who are living in very, very overcrowded situations where they are forced to socialise together there, but they cannot escape outside interference. I'm so sad for baby Sapphire.
Ricky Houghton says young mums need support.
There's some lovely parenting programs out there, but nothing beats the love of your immediate family and aunties to encourage you to breastfeed, to encourage you and warn you of the dangers of what could happen if you feed Bubba after consuming things like alcohol.
Otago University researcher Shirley Padakul says alcohol can affect the development of a baby's brain, sleep patterns and weight gain. She says the Ministry of Health does have advice for mums.
The recommendation is don't drink any alcohol, but if at all you want to drink, make sure you're drinking not more than 1 or 2 standard drinks in a week, not regular or daily drinking. And make sure that you're drinking 2 or 3 hours before your next breastfeed.
But Shirley Padakul says there's no data about whether that message is getting passed on.
Whether this is getting communicated by health professionals, maybe the midwives in the early stages of pregnancy, the blanket nurses later on, and the GPs to the woman, is something we do not know for New Zealand.
A community paediatrician with the Northland District Health Board, Elsa Tuck, says alcohol consumption can also affect a mum's ability to respond to their baby.
We know that parents are exhausted at the best of the time, so it's really around that wider issue around support for parents and their capacity to parent.
But Elsa Tuck says we don't know the full picture about what was happening in Sapphire's whānau, and people shouldn't rush to judge. While the coroner, Deborah Bell, didn't make any specific recommendations, she stressed the importance of breastfeeding mothers avoiding alcohol at any stage. A copy of her findings will be sent to the Ministry of Health. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
At 12 minutes past 5, well, there's no need for a segue. It's said that a society is judged by how it treats its most vulnerable members. And at Christchurch Men's Prison, it would appear we are falling short. The latest prison inspectorate report has found inmates are waiting up to 3 weeks to be seen by a nurse, several months for a physio, and limited resources are having a significant impact on healthcare. Prisoner advocates say it's not limited to Christchurch, with jails across the country struggling under massive pressures. They're renewing calls for primary prisoner health to become the domain of the Ministry of Health, as they say corrections is not up to the task. Nita Blakeperson has more.
Christchurch Men's Prison is one of the country's largest, with capacity for more than 900 inmates. When the Inspectorate Office visited last June, it found that while prisoners were generally healthy and safe, access to healthcare was significantly impacted by insufficient nursing, medical officer and physiotherapy resources. On June the 19th, 2018, there were 157 health request forms which had not been dealt with. The oldest form had been lodged 3 weeks earlier. Prisoners referred to physiotherapists in April were still waiting to be seen in June, and the nurse's office, where medication is administered, was crowded and not fit for purpose. Cosmo Jeffrey, the Canterbury president of the Howard League for Penal Reform, says the prison system is under huge pressure.
Everywhere you look, the system is overloaded. And from the reports that we're talking about from the Inspector of Prisons, he basically declares that there should be at least 22 full-time equivalent staff people, and that's the minimum you need. So 22 full-time. At the moment, the way I look at it, they've only got 17. So that means 25% of the staff down.
Cosmo Jeffrey says retaining health staff has always been a challenge, and it's clear they're not coping.
I don't make a secret. I've been in prison. I know what it's like. And if you are not high on the list, then you won't get seen to. And it's the squeaky wheel gets the oil. So if you're a bit recalcitrant or a bit timid or you're not confident in your surroundings, you'll make one complaint and then you'll hope it gets better. And I know of cases where people have had brain issues and they keep getting paracetamols and find they have a tumour and they're rushed in at the last minute. And that's because the system is just totally overloaded.
Corrections Chief Custodial Officer Neil Beals says action has been taken to address the issues raised by the Inspectorate, with dedicated staff assigned to help coordinate medical appointments, and a recruitment process is underway for an assistant healthcare manager. A new health referral process has been brought in to improve appointment and recalls, which has seen a reduction in wait times. But the situation isn't confined to Christchurch. Ulalatele lost his niece Vicky to stomach cancer in 2017. She had entered the Auckland Region Women's Corrections Facility in 2016 with a diagnosis of irritable bowel syndrome and had died after a corrections doctor and nurse failed to respond appropriately to her symptoms.
If you were to look at this in the harsh light of day, it took her 6 months to get the attention that she required, and by which time it was too late. So as soon as Middlemore Hospital saw her, they found out that she had stomach cancer, needed to operate virtually immediately, and that was really only to give her, I think the prognosis at the time was maybe 6 months of life left.
Ulalatele says corrections apologised for his niece's care and made changes, but he says it's hard to change a whole system.
Unless the lessons learned at the Wiri Women's Facility is rolled out to the other correction facilities, then I'd imagine it'd be still virtually much the same. I mean, the nurses let them down, the guards let them down, and also some of the third-party service providers that were brought in to take care of her let her down.
Nigel Hampton QC is the patron of the Howard League for Penal Reform. He says prisons up and down the country are falling woefully short on healthcare standards. Mr Hampton, along with Ulalatele and Cosmo Jeffrey, all want primary prison healthcare handed over to the Ministry of Health.
By and large, the nursing staff see themselves as corrections officers and buy into the corrections philosophy and mentality, and I'm sad to say, see prisoners as second-class citizens deserving not of the proper attention, but rather second-class service.
Figures released to Checkpoint under the Official Information Act show that since October 2017, the Corrections Complaints Desk has received 332 complaints about health care. Since 2017, there have been 35 natural deaths behind bars and 2 compensation payments made in relation to healthcare in prisons. For Checkpoint, Corneta Blake-Person, TNA.
It's 17 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback. Get in touch on the text 2101 is the number. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz or email us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A Wellington train conductor has been hailed as a hero for literally stopping a train in its tracks after a racist taunt between passengers turned nasty last night. The train had left the Wellington railway station for Upper Hutt, but came to a halt after the conductor overheard a passenger racially abusing another for speaking Hindi on his cell phone. One of the passengers on the train, who asked not to be named, told me how the situation unfolded.
A young girl, about 16, was yelling at a passenger, a fellow commuter on the train, and saying, go back to your country, don't speak that language here. And there was another passenger who had stood up at that time and told her that, enough is enough, you can't speak like that to anyone on this train. Following that, the conductor came along and had obviously seen what was happening and said, if you don't stop talking that way, I'm going to ask you to get off the train.
Wow.
And she was one stop away from her stop, and she told the conductor that. She said, I'm getting off at the next stop. So the conductor said, no, you can get off at this one. I'm not putting up with that nonsense. And she said, I'm not getting off the train then. And then basically said, right, okay, I will call the police. I'm not going to tolerate that behaviour on my train.
So she stopped the train there at the station before the girls' stop. And I don't know, what were you and the other commuters doing at that stage?
So a lot of us had turned around and was watching the situation unfold. What we all kind of, when she had said, we'll stop here and I will call the police and wait for them to escort you off the train, there was nobody on the train that was unhappy with her approach. Everyone was over the moon that she decided to do that and stand up to that behaviour, and, just in awe that she actually had the courage to say, this isn't on and I'm not going to put up with it, no matter who you are and whether you're a paying customer or not. You can get off the train and you can find your own way home.
So people were very, very happy to wait there and supported the staff. But how long was it that they had to wait?
I think we waited about 20 minutes at the train station. It was in the middle of nowhere, so it was on the Upper Hutt line, so it was quite a way to go for many passengers. But everyone was happy to sit there. It was an 8 o'clock train, so quite late at night. But everyone was happy to sit there and wait until madam got off the train via the police.
And how was the victim of all this, the man speaking Hindi on the phone? How did he react?
He was very startled at the very beginning that all this was carrying on and happening. He just sat there very polite to himself. A few passengers got up and asked if he was all right, but he seemed unfazed by the situation. If it was me, I'd be quite outraged, but he just sat there and was very thankful to the train conductor as well for standing up to her as well.
And then the police were called, right?
Correct, yes. So a police officer turned up. As soon as the police officer turned up, she decided to get off the train with her bag. Prior to that, passengers were asking her to just, let everyone get on with their nights, just get off the train. Nobody kind of wants that behaviour around them. It's time to leave, and she just wouldn't budge. She was a strong-willed 16-year-old.
Now, if you saw that staff member, that train conductor again, what would you say to her?
I did see her when I got off the train and just said, look, your behaviour was amazing. We really appreciate everything you did. And I just said, none of us should have to tolerate that behaviour. And, what you said and what you did and what you stood up for really, really spoke to me.
That's a passenger, an anonymous passenger on that train last night. We have ourselves tracked down the conductor in question. We'll hear from her after 6, a bit later in the program. Get in touch too with your feedback. Were you there? Were you on that train? Did you see what happened? What do you think? Waiting 20 minutes for that issue to be dealt with, the young passenger taken off and attended to by the police. Have you been in a similar situation before where something like that has happened, or maybe where nothing has happened and you wish you probably should have spoken up, got up and done something? 2101 is the text. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, and you can email us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Coming up to 22 minutes past 5. Well, here's the message. Eat less meat and dairy if you want to help save the planet. It's been delivered in a major report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Now, the document prepared by more than 100 scientists says people in the West are eating too much meat and dairy, which in turn fuels global warming. It's stopped short of calling on everyone to turn vegan or vegetarian, but says farming practices, methane produced from livestock and deforestation to create more grazing land are all having an adverse effect on the environment. Here's Tracy Neal with the story.
On the streets of Nelson, people seem prepared to cut down on meat and dairy for the sake of the planet.
Oh, 100%.
Yes, I would.
Yeah, sure.
Do you eat much meat and dairy?
Yeah, I eat meat and dairy every day.
I was thinking about getting a falafel just before.
Maybe 4 times a week we would eat meat.
I would be prepared to eat more grains, and not only to save the planet but for health benefits as well.
The report analyses how climate change threatens forests and fields, how farming can stem global warming, and how to balance the two so that growing populations have enough to eat. Anita Reeford, an Associate Professor of Agribusiness at Lincoln University's Economics Research Unit, is one of the report's authors. She says it identifies challenges and solutions, and it's not just up to farmers to act.
It highlights the importance of some of the choices we make individually about the food we consume, but it also highlights the real importance of global interconnectedness, regional cooperation, and policies.
Federated Farmers says it's worried New Zealanders don't understand how much better we are at low emissions farming than other countries. It's a point backed by the Rural Support Trust's Barbara Stewart, who's also a farmer.
We're more efficient than many, many other countries, and if we don't produce it, then it's an opportunity for a country that's less efficient to produce meat. So I think there'll always be a market, but I take the point that we're quite good at adapting and making changes to become more efficient.
The Support Trust provides a range of advisory services, including mental health guidance for farmers. Mrs. Stewart is worried the report will now add to the stigma farmers face.
Well, right now farmers are under a huge amount of pressure, and there's a lot of stigma around being a farmer, and particularly if you're a farmer with M. bovis. It's actually not just a farmer problem, it's a whole New Zealand problem.
Professor Reeford says New Zealand is a leader in some areas of change. Last year, the government asked the Interim Climate Change Committee to look into options to reduce agricultural emissions. The Ministry for the Environment is currently consulting farmers around the country on action on agricultural emissions.
So we're making progress. I think we have, a long way to go still in terms of actually making the changes on the scale that we need to.
A lot of work is happening now to transition land to crop farming, but there are problems with that too. Tim Mackle from Dairy NZ says it's overly simplistic to say plant-based diets don't have their environmental issues.
They have a greenhouse gas footprint, in many cases quite significant for some crops, and also water, those sort of issues too. So we don't want to take an overly simplistic approach to this either.
The IPCC is also calling for stemming the loss and waste of edible food, which is estimated to account for at least 8% of man-made greenhouse gases. Anton Drazovic from the Nelson Environment Centre says 40% of food produced globally is wasted. He says a pilot scheme, Kai Rescue, which is run by the centre, could be a model for others.
We collect excess food from supermarkets and the like that would, for whatever reason, can't be sold. We collect this food from supermarkets, bring it back here, repack it and hand it out to about 51 different charitable organisations that then share that food with community members that can appreciate it and need it.
Helping both the hungry and the environment. For Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
At 5:26, we'll stay with the environment. A new proposal could see a levy slapped on some environmentally harmful products with the money returned to the consumer if the products are recycled. The government is seeking feedback on a plan to force manufacturers to put in place a plan for recycling or the disposing of their goods. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Emma Morgan is in her final year at Sacred Heart College in Lower Hutt. Last month, she and her classmates wrote a letter to government demanding urgent action on plastic waste. To her surprise, she received not only a reply, but an invite to today's announcement in central Wellington.
We totally weren't expecting it. It was very out of the blue. And we're like, okay, what?
What is a good question? The Associate Environment Minister, Eugenie Sage, is proposing what she calls mandatory product stewardship schemes. They'd cover environmentally damaging products, including plastic packaging, tyres, e-waste, refrigerants and batteries.
It's moving to an approach where everyone, from manufacturers, retailers, consumers, takes responsibility for the products that we use and consume throughout their life and particularly at the end of their life.
In practice, that could mean the rollout of nationwide container refund schemes, where consumers are paid if they return plastic drink bottles. It could mean a levy on tyres to cover their eventual disposal.
Everybody contributes. It's whether there's a levy at the point of manufacture or import for things like tyres, and that helps fund the collection, the reprocessing and the recovery of materials.
Environmental groups are hailing the prospect as groundbreaking, and the supermarket chains are on board. Here's Kiri Hannafin from Countdown.
We provide food and groceries to New Zealanders, much of which is wrapped in plastic, and some of it's really easy to recyclable, some of it's less recyclable. But what we want to know is what we should use, how we should be part of the end-of-life solution so that we can make the right investments now, that we don't have to put costs up.
But it's that possibility, increased costs, that has the opposition unimpressed. National's environment spokesperson Scott Simpson says the voluntary schemes which already exist are far superior.
Compulsory regulated product stewardship schemes really add costs to businesses, and sooner or later businesses pass those costs on to their customers. So ultimately it will increase the cost of living for many New Zealanders.
Overseas experience has shown that these schemes have minimal costs to businesses or consumers.
The plan is still in its early stages, with consultation just beginning, but it is a welcome step for student Emma Morgan.
If nothing is going to be done, soon we'll be at a stage where it can't be fixed and we'll be stuffed.
Atu i te whare parimata mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Craig McCulloch ahau.
It is approaching 5:30 on Checkpoint and RNZ National. Coming up later on the program, thinking outside the housing box in Queenstown. Are public libraries and museums being priced out of buying national treasures? And the image featuring the world's most famous pedestrian crossing turns 50 years old. We'd love your feedback. Get in touch on the text 2101. You can tweet us at checkpointrnz. We're on Facebook, Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Susanna Leatawa with the headlines.
An Otago University researcher says there's no way of knowing whether midwives, GPs and plunket nurses are telling mothers to avoid drinking while breastfeeding. A coroner has found the death of 8-week-old Sapphire Rose Williams in January 2017 was most likely due to high levels of alcohol in her mother's breast milk. Shirley Parakul from the university's Department of Preventative and Social Medicine says there's no data about whether that message is getting passed on. The police say a major drug bust at a central Auckland apartment last week was part of Operation Essex, targeting an overseas criminal organisation working in New Zealand. 2 British nationals were arrested, one of them at Auckland Airport following the seizure of more than 200 kilograms of methamphetamine with almost $150 million. The police say it was one of their largest seizures of methamphetamine ever. And packages of cocaine washed up on a West Auckland beach earlier this week are believed to be part of contraband once destined for Australia. 20 packages worth more than $3 million came ashore at Bethel's Beach 2 days ago. The police say the packaging and markings is similar to that of cocaine seized in Australia after being thrown overboard from a boat off northern New South Wales. A train conductor in Wellington has been praised for literally stopping a train in its tracks after a racist taunt between passengers turned nasty last night. The train, which was headed for Upper Hutt, came to a halt after the conductor overheard a passenger racially abusing another for speaking Hindi on his cell phone. Met Service is warning that parts of the country are in for severe weather over the weekend with heavy snow and rain. The forecaster has issued a heavy snow warning for parts of Canterbury and Otago and is predicting heavy rain for parts of Bay of Plenty, Gisborne, South Canterbury, North Otago and Dunedin. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks very much, Susanna. Nana Peltier joins me in the studio for the business news. How are you?
Very well, thank you very much.
New Zealanders are leaving the country more and more. It's a funny sort of graph, this. It was the net migration was climbing, but now it's down, what is it, lowest in 5 years?
It is, but also interestingly, the numbers have been revised going back to 2014.
Right.
So we used to rely, Statistics Department used to rely on departure cards to work these things out. But
we don't do anymore.
We don't do that anymore, no. So now they rely on real, actual comings and goings based on passports and that kind of thing. And what they've discovered is that they've probably overstated how many people have come to New Zealand over the last few years by between 10 and 15,000 a year. Really? So the net migration to the year to June was 50,000, but it may be that, when in the past we talked about numbers like 60, 70, those numbers might not be real.
So we stop filling out departure cards, and as a result we get better statistics about who's coming and going from the country.
Yeah, so they've gone back to 2014, and so what they have found is that the numbers aren't what they used to think they were, and so there's probably not as many migrants in New Zealand as we thought. And interestingly, more New Zealand citizens are leaving. So last month there were 1,700 departing citizens. And don't ask me where they were going.
I was just going to ask you.
I knew you were going to. I could tell, but no, I don't know the answer.
We won't get into IQs of Australia and New Zealand.
And also it was the lowest monthly gain in 5 years. So we had 3,100 extra people move in June, but that's not that's a low number compared with how we had in years gone by. However, because the numbers have all been revised, it's hard to say. But even with the revision, 3,100 is still a low number.
Right.
I mean, that is a revised number, but the revisions show that that's the lowest number in 5 years. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Now we were talking yesterday about the corporate reporting period.
Yes,
it's
that's
almost
right.
upon us.
Well, it sort of got underway a little bit, but we're talking about 30 to 40 big companies reporting over the next month the next month. So next few weeks, we're going to be quite busy with corporate reports. So interestingly, we're going to be looking to see how the global economic conditions are affecting some of the big companies, like say A2 Milk, which is New Zealand's largest company now. They sell that specialty milk, primarily infant formula, into China. What's happening with them? We'll also be looking at how domestic companies are doing. So these are the ones in the retail sector. We already have heard from Briscoe, for example, that their earnings are, they're up a little bit, but not a lot. And we've also heard that Kathmandu's sales numbers are quite strong, but mostly in Australia, not so much in New Zealand. So we'll be looking to see how the warehouse is doing and a few other big companies in the retail sector. But we'll also be looking how the gentailers are doing. Those are the big power companies. It'll be quite interesting to see. A lot of big companies are reporting, and we're talking Air New Zealand, Auckland Airport, just across every kind of sector. We're going to see that. This is the busiest time of year for companies to report, because many of them, it's their full year, but of course the half year is just I guess more of a taste of what's to come. So there you go.
All right, we better get onto the markets.
Yes, we better. So what do we got? Well, the New Zealand dollar's recovered. So we went down quite low after the OCR surprise cut there. We're trading today at 64.9 US cents, so near about 65 cents. 95.3 cents Australian and 53.5 British pence. Now, on the share market, we had a relatively mixed day. We finished down, believe it or not, just 1 point. Wow, one point. And we probably would have done better, but there was some news out of the States that, there's these trade tensions just carry on. So we're at 10,873, and the ASX at the moment is up about 1/3%, so they're doing a little bit better than we are.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hey, have a good weekend.
And thank you.
Nona Peltier there with the latest in the business news at 24 minutes to 6. Housing values in Queenstown seem to have plateaued. But when those values average more than $1 million, a plateau doesn't bring much relief for middle-income earners looking to get into their very first home. And as our Otago Southland reporter Timothy Brown found out, one group is now thinking outside the box.
Baugruppen, meaning building group in German. It isn't a term that's crossed the mind of many New Zealanders. But Urban Village hopes they can change that in Queenstown.
I know what developers aim to try and make in a property development. So my initial thinking was just, if I can bring a group of people together, we can cut out that middleman and save ourselves that 15 to 30% margin. That financial saving, that's sort of almost the byproduct now. And the reason for wanting to do that sort of development is because we can do better housing, is basically just completely flipping the model upside down from that investment approach.
That's Urban Village's founder and chief villager, Mel Halliday. A self-described born and raised Otago girl, she was shocked by the state of the housing market in Queenstown Lakes when she relocated from Christchurch.
When we moved here 2.5 years ago, the option is paying $40,000 a year in rent or, having a $800,000 mortgage and needing a $100,000 deposit or at least to be able to do that.
Mel Halliday says she and her husband had to think outside the box and take inspiration from overseas if they were going to be able to own a home affordably in the town. Urban Village is the result. The collective's first village will be a 12-apartment complex in Queenstown's CBD, with a communal rooftop area providing escape from the hustle and bustle. An offer on a site in Melbourne Street has been approved, and they are working through financing the project at the moment. The idea has got the support of Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust Executive Officer, Julie Scott.
The people that will be moving into the village aren't necessarily people on our waiting list, but at the same time they are people that perhaps can't afford to buy in the current market in Queenstown. So we're really supportive of what they're doing. Anything that brings alternative forms of housing options to Queenstown Lakes is good in our view.
She says the affordability crisis in the district is far from resolved, with the Trust's waiting list growing to over 620 households from about 500 a year ago. And while the Trust has options available for lower and lower middle income earners, families such as Mrs. Halliday's haven't fit the bill in the past.
A typical household of 2 adults and 2 children, the income cap for them to be eligible for one of our programs is around $115,000. Now, there's a lot of households out there who are earning, say, $130,000, so they're just over the limit, but they still can't afford to get into a home of their own in the free market.
Urban Village's first project may soon be underway, but the group wants to take the concept further afield, with Wanaka and Cromwell in its sights. Urban Village's community curator, Barry Grean, says they want to change the way people think about housing and community.
It's not about one project. It's really about using that to absorb everything that we can about the process of developing places and spaces, and how can we take those learnings and form them into a replicable model. And I think to do one and stop would be a disservice to the systemic change that we're wanting to really see.
Mel Halliday says the group now has a wait list of more than 160 people who have shown an interest in being involved with Urban Village in future. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Timothy Brown tēnei.
It's coming up to 20 minutes to 6. Protesters in Christchurch put their bodies on the line today to highlight the environmental impact of coal. 19 people were arrested and 5 train services were disrupted as the group of environmental activists sat on the train tracks. Katie Todd and video journalist Simon Rogers were at the protest and filed this report.
As the business day began in Woolston, the 10 o'clock Kiwi Rail coal train bound for Littleton Port was going nowhere. In its way for about 4 hours, about 30 staunch protesters from Extinction Rebellion sat with signs, banners and a strong aversion to what they say is a completely outdated fuel source. About 70 others expressed their support from the safety of the railway's grass berm. Among them was Julia Neal.
It's really time we started looking towards a sustainable future, and it's happening bit by bit, but it's got to happen so much faster. And coal, we don't need to dig it up, we've got alternatives.
Harry Seeger was walking through Hagley Park when he bumped into some of the protesters. He felt moved by their message.
Coal is just unnecessary, it's dirty, we have alternatives, it's cheap, it's kind of still using and employing the idea of kind of all that's wrong and that we don't need to do at the moment, whereas we need to employ a more progressive and forward-thinking stance when it comes to how we source our energy. Coal is simply, it's had its time, and now it's time for us to move forward and leave coal behind, leave it in the ground.
The protest was complete with home baking, bongo drums, onesies and elephant costumes. But it also featured a heavy police presence and some of the most drastic action taken by Extinction Rebellion to date. Speaking from beyond the police line at the coal face of the protest, Dave Simpson told us it's the most extreme thing he's ever done for climate change.
I've got 2 small kids. I've got a 7-year-old and a 4.5-year-old, and I need to be able to look them in the eye. I need to be able to look them in the eye and say that actually we did our best. And yeah, I've had enough of inaction. And I think we just need to draw a line in the sand and start doing stuff. You can see it happening all around the world. It needs to be here too.
Sarah Campbell told us she isn't afraid to get arrested for the cause, as she and 18 others were when they refused to leave of their own accord at about 2:30.
I knew that that's what I was up for when I came here today. It's all part of it, and it's you know, it's the length I'm willing to go to get some change and to stop our coal use.
4 freight trains and 1 shunt train were halted in total before the arrests were made. In a statement, Kiwi Rail's Chief Operating Officer Todd Moyle says he regrets the inconvenience to Kiwi Rail's customers. But Extinction Rebellion spokesperson Siana Fitzgerald says today's message wasn't necessarily pointed at Kiwi Rail, and she says the group are going to keep up the heat on the issue of coal, with today's event marking the beginning of serious nationwide action.
Activists have been fighting the coal industry in New Zealand for a long time, and there have been some heartbreaking losses of New Zealand's ecology to the coal industry. But looking at all the people that we've got now, we're at that point where actually we do have enough people to tip the balance on coal.
The police say they are speaking with the 19 people arrested for trespass. Other Extinction Rebellion members not arrested have been waiting outside Christchurch Police Station for their release with cups of tea and scones. In Christchurch, for Checkpoint, Katie Todd.
It's coming up to 5:45. I'm Alex Perrottet. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We are keen for your feedback. Get in touch. You can tell us what you think about those protesters there. In fact, you can go on Facebook or our website and watch Katie's video story. Simon Rogers shot there right on the train tracks there near Christchurch, and plenty of people, as she said, jumping about in onesies, but certainly causing some delays on the train tracks there. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. A man defamed by whale oil blogger Cameron Slater has had the last laugh after purchasing the whale oil domain and taking over the website today. Businessman Matt Blomfield was the target of an online campaign that hit its peak when a masked gunman fired shots at his home in front of his children. Cameron Slater was ordered to pay Mr Blomfield $70,000 for severe humiliation, loss of dignity and injury to feelings back in March. The protracted episode is recounted in Margie Thompson's recently published book Whale Oil, in which she warns New Zealanders about cyberbullying. Those logging onto the Whale Oil site today are redirected to a page displayed as an epilogue to Thompson's book and provides a link for those who want to purchase it. The new owner of Whale Oil, Matt Blomfield, says his main motivation is to remove the false claims and material on him and other people from the internet for good.
I've been contacted by literally hundreds of people who have had various issues with Cameron Slater and the Whale Oil website over the last 15 years. And I think to understand the rationale, I suppose you've got to realise the enormity of how many stories are on that website. And people from all walks of life who have in some way been damaged by the website. And a lot of those people I've developed personal relationships with. A lot of them are good people. And in order to fully close down the website and take it away so that it's going to be gone for good, by taking ownership of it means that I'm not chopping down the neighbours' trees, I'm chopping down trees on my own property. So it makes it a much easier process.
Right, and so you have taken over that website today. You've taken advantage of the fact that Cameron Slater is bankrupt. He's facing liquidators. He's running into his own problems there, and so I guess as it says on the website today, it's karma. Explain to us why this is more than just revenge and getting back at him. You're trying to set the record straight after a hugely damaging defamation.
I think there's always an element of revenge in anything that you do. I mean, he caused a lot of harm to me and my family, but I think the rationale's explained by the number of people that he's damaged. I mean, he's one person. He's not as unwell as he would like people to think. He's still out there doing stuff. They've got their new website they're trying to push at the moment, and there's literally hundreds of people who he's caused harm, and you're talking about one against many. And I don't think it's hard to rationalise why you would want to see this shut down when there's so many people getting hurt. It's not an insignificant amount of damage he's done over the years.
What will you do with the site now? You've got an epilogue there and offering an opportunity for people to buy the book. What else will you do with the Whale Oil website?
I haven't decided that. I mean, the only thing I want to do with it right now is just get rid of the stories that are online. So that's first and foremost, and that'll largely be driven by when I've got time and money to make that happen. What happens to the site after I've done that? I mean, there might not be much left behind once we've pulled everything down. If someone wants it, they can come and talk to me and they can have it. But the main motive is just to get rid of what's out there.
That's Matt Blomfield there responding to our questions about him taking over the Whale Oil blog. He was awarded by the High Court over $70,000 after being defamed by whale oil blogger Cameron Slater earlier this year. It's exactly 12 minutes to 6. Some historians are concerned New Zealand's public libraries and museums are being priced out of buying national taonga by private investors snapping up items from the country's early history. Public institutions have always come up against private collectors at auction houses, but a recent loss has called into question the depth of the public purse. Although some national treasures can't be taken out of the country, it could be decades before an item resurfaces into the public domain. Amy Williams reports.
A quiet Auckland suburb may not seem like an obvious home for a collection of rare treasures from New Zealand's early history, but in one house they're part of the furniture. Private collector Spencer Schooler keeps carefully preserved books and documents dating back to the early 1800s in his home and lends others to museums.
Kind of got an academic background, so as part of that I read a lot of books all the time anyway, so I've got an interest in books, I've got an interest in New Zealand. Bring those two together. There was a great opportunity 10 years ago to get involved when there's some very rare books available, and I took the plunge and have not looked back.
Dr. Schooler recently outbid a number of the country's libraries for a prized copy of a corrected printing of a Treaty of Waitangi Proclamation of Sovereignty and handwritten letter for $31,000. He bought them when hundreds of rare documents and books from the Christopher Parr collection went under the hammer in June.
That particular item I thought I didn't have a chance on. I thought I might have a chance on some earlier ones which I missed. And it's just because I missed all the others that this was the last one available. So I gave it my best shot. It was my highest bid I was going to make, and just by chance I ended up with it.
Dr. Schooler has been collecting for a decade and considers himself a custodian.
In my particular case, I'm very happy with extremely rare items to, rather than have them displayed at my own home, to lend them to a museum, provided they're going to display them. You know, I'm not willing to lend them if they're going to store them, because then I might as well have them at home and see them myself. But if they're willing to display them, then I'm very, very happy to lend them to them.
The auction house Art and Object sold the entire Christopher Parr collection for just over $500,000. The extensive collection was described as a mouth-watering part of the country's bibliohistory, and the auction flushed out 10 institutions keen on acquiring taonga. But institutions bought just 75 of the 300 items. The rest went to private buyers. An independent specialist in New Zealand's print history, Dr. Phil Parkinson, says the original handwritten letter is a missing link in the Alexander Turnbull Library. The collection of rare documents is a division of the National Library of New Zealand, which are housed in Wellington.
There's relatively little, apart from occasional stray documents, which have remained in private collections. The one which we missed out on the one thing which caused a bit of flurry the other day, is one of the proclamations. It's not actually quite what the purchaser thought it was, but it had with it a manuscript letter by Shortland. That is the thing which we had been particularly trying to acquire for the Turnbull.
As a former librarian at Alexander Turnbull Library, Dr. Parkinson says he's disappointed the institution did not acquire the handwritten letter.
You need to have all the evidence available. If you are missing vital pieces of evidence, then the story can never be completed.
Dr. Parkinson says the Alexander Turnbull Library could try to secure the letter in the future.
Private collectors can drive prices up, as we saw for the recent auction, where the price was driven up to over $30,000. At that stage, the library was no longer able to compete with the private purchaser.
In a statement, its chief librarian, Chris Zeke, said it's not unusual for public institutions to be outbid by private bidders of significant means. Dr. Zeke said public institutions believe that there's value in certain items being in public ownership so they can be accessible to New Zealanders. When he's at auctions, private collector Dr. Schooler does not see his bids as competing against the public purse.
I don't see it as competing ever against institutions or not institutions. I other than one or two, I actually don't know which people in the auction room are and which aren't, to be honest. It's just you're forming your own view of value and what you're looking for and making decisions as you go through the auction.
Auckland War Memorial Museum was among 10 institutions bidding on items at the Christopher Parr Collection auction. The museum's Director of Collections and Research, David Reeves, says they won 4 of the 13 lots they bid on at the auction.
Each organisation has its own history and its own strengths, and over time we've got to know each other better and better, and we take care not to overlap too much, and because ultimately these things are all cared for by public organisations, and there's only so much money to go around. So it's responsible for us to make sure that we are in touch with each other and are collecting in complementary areas without too much duplication.
Dr. Reeves is philosophical about auction wins and losses.
Professionally, it's sometimes disappointing, but also it's a reality that the landscape is a mixture of public and private collectors, and sometimes the cookie crumbles a different way. That's just how it goes.
He says auctions make up a small portion of acquisitions, and public institutions sometimes work with private collectors to help them acquire national treasures.
There are opportunities to work with private collectors, so we do, when we mount exhibitions, we often do borrow from private collections or indeed other public collections. So I think the fact that something is purchased by a private collector doesn't necessarily mean that it disappears for good. Of course, the professional interests of curators are that they work here because they enjoy sharing collections with the public, and so their hope is to be able to bring those collections to light. But on the other hand, sometimes it provides an opportunity to work jointly with private collectors, and we have had a number of instances where, working before the auction, we've been able to sort of stitch up a deal where we have a joint bid for an item where a philanthropically minded private collector wants to work with the museum, and we put in some of the funding each and have been successful.
Even so, Dr. Reeves says public institutions could always do with more funding for their collections. If a treasure of national significance needs to be brought back to New Zealand ownership, the government has the power to requisition items under the Protected Objects Act. It has done this only twice in recent times, neither with the documents. And although the Act requires objects of national significance to be registered against their owners, the list of these collectors and what they own is confidential. Private collectors can fly under the public's radar, as can treasures of national significance. For Checkpoint, this is Amy Williams.
It's coming up to 4 minutes to 6. The All Blacks appear keen to have their best players on the field, regardless of what position they're in, after revealing what's likely their strongest possible side to play the Wallabies tomorrow night. The Bledisloe Cup means a lot to the world champions, and they don't want to risk losing it after 17 years of dominance. But this year, World Cup glory is the ultimate goal. So what does tomorrow night's team reveal about the All Blacks' likely side for their World Cup title defence in Japan? Sports reporter Clay Wilson reveals.
And White! Nick White steals a try! They stood off him!
The Wallabies won the first Bledisloe Test in 2015, but went on to lose the return match at Eden Park and the World Cup final to the All Blacks. The All Blacks would happily take those results again this year, but hooker Dane Coles says letting their thoughts wander to Japan would be fatal.
If you think about World Cup selection and momentum going into a World Cup, you're taking your attention way where it needs to be, and everyone's attention needs to be in Perth for us to have the best chance of performing this week.
However, one can't help but wonder what this All Blacks team means for World Cup selection. Ardie Savea, New Zealand's best Super Rugby player this year, starts at blindside, forming a loose forward trio with open side Sam Cane and captain and number 8 Kieran Reid. Hansen has been reluctant to use Savea at number 6, but the latter's been given a chance to lock up the position for the World Cup.
Probably the best back row we can put on the park. Ardie, who's been in outstanding form. Sam Cane's come back and gives us a real physical presence on the park and is a natural 7. And Rido, he's coming back into his true form. So once people see what we're doing on Saturday, they'll agree that they're the 3 guys we should have picked.
Usually an open side or number 8, the hard-running Savea says things won't change too much.
I've just got 6 on my back, I guess, and everything will stay the same and just go out there and just nail my role.
Hansen has made 6 changes to his starting lineup for tomorrow night's clash, but retained Richie Mo'unga at first 5 with Beauden Barrett again at fullback, another of his risk and reward gambits. Barrett is happy to be at the back, and he believes the Wallabies are more dangerous without sacked fullback Israel Folau. Barrett believes replacement Kurtley Beale provides Australia more X-factor.
Kurtley's a very exciting player and he's so unpredictable. I think they certainly don't lose anything by having Kurtley there. If anything, it's probably more threatening.
But how much of a threat to the All Blacks are the Wallabies? A team that haven't won the Trans-Tasman Trophy since 2002. Prop Sekopi Kepu is one of several Australian veterans heading overseas after the World Cup, and he's vowing to leave nothing in the tank as he bids to finally hold the Bledisloe aloft.
Reality drops that, this is your last shot at the Bledisloe, and it is for a few of us. It's focusing on a day-to-day process, to be the best that we can be on Saturday.
The Wallabies, though, are at long odds with the bookies, and they'll need to produce their best performance for some time to win in Perth. But if the All Blacks are as scratchy as they were in their last two games, who wins is anyone's guess. Mō te hotaka o tia hipo nei, ko Clay Wilson aho.
Well, just before we get to the news at 6 with Susanna, there's a little bit of feedback. People getting in touch on both train issues. The one where the conductor stopped the train for 20 minutes and ordered the 16-year-old passenger off. Someone says, well done on the conductor. Very correct and wise of her. New Zealand is built on diversity. Someone else is saying, that is who we are. That's Annie getting in touch with that message. And Tanya saying the conductor was amazing and demonstrated behaviour that all of us can aspire to. And on the Christchurch train tracks, so brave, the protesters, wonderful commitments. Someone else saying, well done, we can't afford to burn any more fossil fuels. Urgent action is needed worldwide. That's from Alison. While someone else says a $100 fine should be a suspended sentence and a $500 fine.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susanna Leatawa tēnei. An Otago University researcher says there's no way of knowing whether messages about avoiding drinking while breastfeeding are getting through to mothers. 2-month-old Sapphire Rose Williams died in January 2017, and a coroner has found her death was most likely due to high levels of alcohol in her mother's breast milk. The Ministry of Health says breastfeeding mums should avoid alcohol, but if they do have a few drinks, they shouldn't feed their babies for at least a couple of hours. But Shirley Parakul from Otago's Department of Preventative and Social Medicine says there's no data about whether that message is getting passed on to midwives, or passed on by midwives, GPs or plunket nurses. While the coroner, Deborah Bell, didn't make any specific recommendations, she stressed the importance of breastfeeding mothers avoiding alcohol at any stage. The police believe the packages of cocaine that washed up on a West Auckland beach earlier this week were once destined for Australia. 20 packages of the drug worth more than $3 million came ashore at Bethel's Beach on Wednesday evening. Catherine Hutton reports.
In August last year, a rigid inflatable boat was spotted by patrols off the northern New South Wales coast, heading towards the mainland. The police say the two occupants offloaded packages of cocaine into the sea before they were arrested. Most of it was recovered washed up on the Australian coastline from northern Queensland down to New South Wales. The police say the markings and packagings of the Bethel Beach drugs are consistent with those seized in Australia, and it appears they have drifted over here in the past year. They say there's the small possibility of further packages turning up, and people should contact them if they find any suspicious or concerning items. This is Catherine Hutton.
19 people sitting in the middle of train tracks in Christchurch as part of a protest against coal have been arrested this afternoon. Environmental activists from the group Extinction Rebellion halted a Kiwi Rail train carrying coal to the port in Littleton near Woolston this morning, along with 4 other trains. As well as those sitting on the tracks, about 70 other protesters held up signs and played instruments to attract the attention of passing motorists. It is the most drastic action taken in the South Island by the environmental activist group. Speaking from the train tracks, protester Sarah Campbell says she doesn't mind getting arrested if it's getting the message across.
I knew that that's what I was up for when I came here today. It's all part of it, and it's the length I'm willing to go to get some change and to stop our coal use.
Coal protester Sarah Campbell. A rural support coordinator says farmers are already under pressure, and a new report of farming and climate change will add to the stigma. A report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says people in the West are eating too much meat and dairy, which is having a substantial impact on the climate. The Rural Support Trust is a network of national coordinators who help farmers connect with support ranging from financial advice to mental health. It's at top of the South Island coordinator, Barbara Stewart, who is also a farmer, says change is needed, but it's not up to farmers alone.
Well, right now farmers are under a huge amount of pressure, and there's a lot of stigma around being a farmer, and particularly if you're a farmer with M. bovis. It's actually not just a farmer problem, it's a whole New Zealand problem.
Barbara Stewart says that's because 48% of New Zealand's export income is from agriculture. Hong Kong's airport authority says only passengers with a ticket will be allowed into the airport terminal ahead of an expected anti-government protest today. Travellers have been warned to arrive early. Activists are planning another weekend of demonstrations. The weekly protests began more than 2 months ago with demands to scrap an extradition bill, but have since changed into a broader pro-democracy movement. China has issued increasingly stern warnings as the demonstrations have become more violent. Parts of the country are in for severe weather over the weekend, with warnings for heavy snow and rain. Met Service has issued a heavy snow weather warning for parts of Canterbury and Otago. It's predicting heavy rain for parts of Bay of Plenty and Gisborne, South Canterbury, North Otago and Dunedin. 3 people have been seriously injured in Melbourne after wild weather brought down a tree on top of their car. A pier has also been snapped in half as the winter storm lashes southeastern Australia with rain and high winds. In Sydney, dozens of flights have been cancelled, as the ABC's Kathleen Calderwood reports.
Only one runway is operating in Sydney as the airport is battered by strong westerly winds. More than 60 domestic flights have been cancelled and many departures are being delayed by 30 to 40 minutes. The weather has affected flights arriving from all over the world, including London, Japan and China. Travellers are advised to check with their airline about the status of their flight.
Kathleen Calderwood in Sydney. It's 6:05. The Black Ferns are predicting a much stiffer challenge from Australia in their 2-test rugby series, which starts in Perth tomorrow night. The New Zealand women's match is the curtain raiser to the All Blacks opening Bledisloe Cup match against the Wallabies. The Black Ferns comfortably won both tests in the Laurie O'Reilly series last year, but coach Glenn Moore believes the Australians are now reaping the rewards of a strong domestic competition.
They've improved a lot, and I think that's coming off the back of the fact that they are playing a Super Rugby concept. You know, we're probably seeing a few changes in their side that has come off the back of some depth out of that series. You know, I think overall their game's developed and they're a lot better side than what they were last year.
Glenn Moore. The Wellington Phoenix have signed former Bundesliga player Matti Steinemann from Germany, from the German club in Hamburg, on a year-long deal. The 24-year-old defensive midfielder has represented Germany at age grade level, making his Bundesliga debut in 2014. Most recently, he has played at Danish club Vedesel on loan from Hamburg. Rosie Ruiz, the woman who famously crossed the line first at the 1980 Boston Marathon before being disqualified for cheating, has died of cancer at the age of 66. Cuban-born Ruiz never admitted that she had not completed the entire marathon course, but was disqualified 8 days after the race after witnesses said they had seen her step out of the crowd near the finish line. And day 2 of the 3-day game between the Black Caps and Sri Lanka is yet to resume in Katunayaka this evening due to bad weather.
Tomorrow morning, Cambridge Analytica claimed to have up to 5,000 data points on every American voter, and they used them to help Donald Trump win the presidency. What happened when David Carroll asked for his data back? Eve Ensler has written the apology she wishes her abusive father could have offered her. Robert Suchet on his life as Hercule Poirot. And shut up or you face. Yeah, that guy. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. The northern half of the North Island from Taranaki and Taupo northwards, including Bay of Plenty. Occasional rain or showers, but long fine spells as well. Heavy falls and thunderstorms are possible from tomorrow afternoon. Whanganui and Taihape to Wellington, mainly fine tonight. A few showers inland. Showers becoming widespread and heavy tomorrow, with possible thunderstorms from the afternoon. Gisborne and northern Hawke's Bay, scattered rain clearing this evening, mainly fine tomorrow. Central and southern Hawke's Bay, including Waidat Upper, mainly fine tonight, showers tomorrow, possibly heavy and thundery about the ranges. For Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland, fine tonight. Occasional rain tomorrow, snow down to 800 metres for a time. Canterbury and North Otago, rain setting in this evening. Some heavy falls tomorrow, snow about or just above 300 metres. Central Otago, Dunedin and Clutha, a few showers tonight. Scattered rain tomorrow, falling as snow above 300 metres. Southland, cloudy periods and a few showers. Chatham Islands, showers clearing tomorrow. RNZ National, it's 6:08.
Thanks very much, Susanna. It's Friday night, so are you eating at home or eating out?
Well, because I work until 11, I guess I could consider RNZ my home. I'm eating here. How does that work?
Did you bring
is it out
or
or
are
is
you
it in?
Uber eating?
Oh, no, I brought it.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Good. Well, no, don't worry. You're not responsible for the problems in the next story. So just checking.
Thank you.
It is Friday night. It's RNZ Checkpoint. And perhaps you're thinking about what you're going to eat tonight. But the latest is that the food delivery app Uber Eats is being accused of taking such high fees that it's running some restaurants into the ground. It has so many customers and a near monopoly of the ready-to-eat delivery market that restaurants don't want to give that business up. Now, to make things work, so-called ghost restaurants are popping up which have no shopfront and only deliver. Our reporter Jordan Bond has more.
Restaurants are grappling with food delivery services eating into their profits.
There's absolutely an adapt and die situation. A lot of restaurants have already died.
That's Tyler Curlin. He's the chief operating officer of a company that owns more than 40 outlets of Mexicali Fresh and Burger, Wisconsin. He says Uber Eats is a massive deal with over 2,000 active restaurants in 6 New Zealand cities.
We've run restaurants for a couple decades now, and there's been no bigger disruptor to us than Uber Eats. Delivery's not going anywhere, so it's a convenience for customers. But as it stands, it's a real battle, and a lot of people are really struggling to figure out how to make that work. So it's a bit scary at the present moment, but we're just trying to figure out how to ride the wave.
Another restaurant owner in Auckland who didn't want to be named says Uber Eats has such a large share of the food market with so much customer money attached that you have to jump aboard or you'll miss out. He says it's an even more cutthroat industry than it was.
Do I want to deal with Uber Eats? No. Would I rather just have a normal restaurant operation? Definitely yes. You're a bit cornered, really. You jump on the train, you sort of get used to the extra turnover coming through the business. You would doubt whether your numbers would bounce back up if you stopped.
He says Uber takes a 35% commission plus GST. So for them to make the same amount on a meal as a walk-in customer, they'd have to add that much, 35%, on top of normal prices. But that would put customers off. One of the things they're both trying is ghost restaurants. You can't walk in, there's no shop front, no seats. It's a restaurant that exists purely to deliver food through Uber Eats, often with multiple restaurants operating out of one kitchen.
It gives you multiple revenue streams to pay the same rent. I figure we could do a few more brands, and that kind of you get that scale where you can make it work. So again, it is about adapting if you've got the capabilities to create new brands.
But not all restaurants are able to just create a new brand, and many don't have the money to buy a new kitchen. So instead, they're selling food for a tiny margin, and in some cases at cost price, riding the wave and just trying to stay on the board. Our anonymous restaurant owner has 3 ghost restaurants which people can order from online.
People are all about comfort, about putting on Netflix and being at home in their own personal comfort, and Uber Eats has tackled that market, and which means that we don't really get as much customers coming through the door to go out, socialise, have some food, drink.
The president of the Restaurant Association, Mike Egan, says it's affected the industry, but some parts more than others. Fine dining, for example, doesn't come in a paper bag. He says food for a lot of people is now about convenience.
What we've got to do as an industry is we've got to get, they call it a share of stomach. In America, I think 50% of all food is consumed outside the home. In Hong Kong, it's about 90%. We think in New Zealand it's probably about 10 or 15%. We can grow that portion, and there seems to be a lot of room in the market.
In a statement, Uber says it places a lot of value on long-term relationships and wants the businesses they partner with to thrive. It says it lets restaurants reach new customers, and its service fees gives them access to delivery drivers and other business support and insights. Mr. Curlin says somehow, maybe through competition, Uber will have to drop its commission rate.
Without the driver in the restaurant, they don't have a business. And so if the restaurants are failing, it's not working. It's too high. Ultimately, they're going to have to drop that because long-term, they won't have enough people or restaurants able to be on the platform.
But in the meantime, all 3 restaurateurs are having to play the game because there's a big stomach share up for grabs. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Jordan Bond, tēnei.
It's 13 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. Get in touch with your feedback. 2101 is the text. You can email us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Some of you have been getting in touch about that lovely Wellington train conductor who stopped the train for 20 minutes and stopped the train in its tracks, really, to talk to and to evict a racist passenger who was taunting an Indian man who was speaking Hindi on his phone. Now, the train was en route to Upper Hutt when the conductor stopped it, called the police and offloaded the passenger who had abused the man. In the past hour, we've actually been able to track down that conductor. Her name is JJ Phillips.
Just as I was walking through doing the tickets, one passenger raised a concern to me when I clipped her ticket. So I finished doing her, and then I went to where this particular passenger was, and she was a teenage girl, and she was being abused at some passengers, and the passengers who were receiving the abuse, I called them out and I asked them what had happened, and this teenage girl was still being abusive towards them. So I called the passenger out and another passenger who had intervened, sticking up for the passenger taking the abuse. I took them outside of the train and got their side of the story as to what was happening, and apparently the Indian passenger was just minding his own business, talking to his friend in their own language, but it appeared to be that this teenage girl had an issue with them talking in their own language, and she was being racist and abusive towards them.
And you weren't having any of that on your train, were you?
No, exactly. No, we don't, we don't put up with a language like that of any kind, whether it be racist, abusive, anything like that. Because, we're carrying passengers to and from A to B. And we want our passengers to get from A to B in a safe manner. And
what did you tell her, JJ? What was your message?
Pretty much I was just telling this young girl to cut her abusive racism comments to herself, and she would just nod her head and just keep swearing.
Wow.
And then I asked where she was going to, Petone, and then her manner just didn't change at all. So I thought to myself, no, I'm not carrying you on this train, you're off. So when I told her she was getting off, she said no, and I said, well, this train's not moving anywhere until you get off. She just shrugged her shoulders, and I said, right, I'm calling the cops. She goes, fine. That was just her total manner about it.
She was calling your bluff. I don't think she expected you to stop that train and make passengers wait for 20 minutes. How did you feel as you decided to do that? Were you in two minds?
No, not at all. Not at all. When it comes to something like that, not at all. Especially after what we've been through, 15th of March, you know. There's still tender feelings out there. People don't show them, but I'm sure there are.
Hey, JJ, how did the other passengers react to what you did?
I got a lot of comments, good comments from passengers as they disembarked from the trains.
Because you made them all wait 20 minutes. There was a bit of a risk of maybe even frustrating some of them.
Yes, exactly. And all I could do was just apologise to the passengers.
But they had your back.
And
they supported what you were doing.
Yes, exactly. I said to them, I don't condone this type of behaviour.
Now, if you're going to send a message, particularly to young people, about behaviour on your train or any trains, any public transport, or in public altogether, what's your message to them, particularly regarding people who come from overseas and are sharing, in a sense, their own culture, their own language with us?
All I can say to people of all race and creed is that we are here as one people in this country, and we should all share things equally. I mean, we're all living in this country for a purpose, and treat every person with the same respect that you would like to be treated as, with total respect. Doesn't matter what race you are.
JJ Phillips there, train conductor from Wellington. That's the golden rule, isn't it? Do unto others. It's 6:18. A former National Cabinet Minister has launched a blistering attack on the way the Crown has consulted with Maori over many years, saying the state would often just tell them what it was doing. Former Treaty Negotiations Minister Chris Finlayson made the comments at a seafood conference in Queenstown. Eric Frickberg was there.
Chris Finlayson focused his attack on the way his own government proposed to establish a massive 620,000 square kilometre ocean sanctuary around the Kermadec Islands. This would put a block on fishing in 15% of New Zealand's total exclusive economic zone in a huge stretch of ocean 1,000 kilometres northeast of New Zealand. The idea ground to a halt under his government and languished further under Labour. Mr Finlayson told his audience the way Maori were consulted over this was completely inadequate.
The Crown has so often failed to observe natural justice and the rule of law in dealings with Maori, and secondly, the Crown has failed to recognise and respect the property rights of Maori.
Mr Finlayson said the Kermadec consultation was inadequate. A quick phone call to Ngāti Kuri, the far north iwi, was not enough. Mr Finlayson said even his own cabinet wasn't properly consulted and Maori were hardly spoken to at all.
The Crown's heavily into consulting, but it's my experience over 9 years that even today, that people see consultation as some kind of box-ticking exercise. And it's not good enough. Consultation does not mean informing someone of a result.
He went on to say the proposal for a fishing sanctuary in the Kermadecs conflicted with the 1992 fishing settlement between Maori and the Crown. This gave Maori a share of future development rights in fishing, not just a share in the status quo. But when he asked officials at the Ministry for the Environment to explain their understanding of the 1992 settlement, they didn't really know what he was talking about. Mr Finlayson said a clear inference of this was that Maori property rights were inferior to Pākehā property rights.
The 1992 settlement was full and final, and the integrity of that settlement has to be safeguarded at all costs.
In response to this, the New Zealand First MP and Cabinet Minister Shane Jones says the Kermadec episode was a tawdry case of riding roughshod over people's rights.
Retaining the future potential of the Kermadecs, not only for its environmental qualities but also for its economic potential, has to be at the centre. It's obvious that you can't have an answer to the Kermadecs in the absence of significant Maori input.
At present, the Kermadec proposals appear to be going nowhere in Parliament. The Labour-led government has been prodded on this subject by the former Environment Minister Nick Smith, but has stayed largely silent in response. The Environment Minister David Parker fully backs Mr Finlayson's criticism of the lack of consultation ahead of former Prime Minister John Key's grand announcement on the international stage. Mr Parker agrees it's left a legacy of mistrust that this government is having to deal with.
You can't say we're going to take people's fishing quota rights off them or the value of a treaty settlement, pretend that they've left with fishing rights but set their allowable catch at zero and say you can go to court but you can't get a remedy. I mean, it really was beads and blankets, and I'm opposed to that.
Chris Finlayson retired from politics this year to return to the law, making it easier for him to speak out about the actions of the National Party when it was in power. From Queenstown for Checkpoint, Ko Eric Frickberg Tene.
6:22. A Huntly mother says her family has been left traumatised following an early morning police raid that saw 4 cars and a wagon turn up at 5 a.m. on Wednesday. Cheryl Matenga says her young children were left frightened when they were woken up by police, who soon discovered the offender, who was known to her, wasn't living there. Jessie Chang reports.
It's a quiet, peaceful morning outside Cheryl Matenga's whare on Harris Street in Huntly. A stark contrast to what took place just 2 days ago.
We're here to execute a search warrant.
Just before 5 o'clock on Wednesday morning, Cheryl Matenga and her family were woken up by police officers in masks, some armed with guns.
The police had pushed my uncle across to our left neighbour, had my partner up against the car and putting zip ties on him, and when they were pulling me back, we were all separated. Once I seen my baby, they were pulling me back and not letting me get to her, And they were saying, they're yelling in my face, telling me if I step onto the property again, they would arrest me. Yelling, shouting in my face, dogs barking hard out, guns at their hands. It was just scary. It's actually traumatising.
Ms Martinga, who live-streamed the raid, says she has in the past enjoyed a good relationship with the police. The 26-year-old was born and raised in Huntly and in recent years has been working with officers to reach the rangatahi in the area. Less than 24 hours before Wednesday morning, she had been in a hui with the police about pastoral care and the community.
I understand that they need to do what they need to do to keep us safe. The issue that I have with them is what my kids were presented with that morning. They should not ever have to wake up in their home and ever had to be escorted out by a police officer. Be yelled out to, told to evacuate. They should never ever have to see police with guns.
Ms Martinga says while the person the police were looking for is known to her, they have never lived at her home. She says the raid has had a deep impact on her kids.
My kids are totally in shock. My baby girl, she's 4, and she said to her dad, "Dad, you upset the police. That's how come they come to our house." We had nothing to do with what they were here for, yet my kids are thinking that we're inflicting that on them.
The police say the search warrant was pre-planned and it related to a person they are seeking involving serious offending in the Huntly community. They say they didn't find the person they were looking for. The police say while inquiries are ongoing, further comment cannot be made at this time. Cheryl Martinga's grandfather, Sonny Martinga, says there should be a way for the police to do their jobs that doesn't scar innocent children.
There has to be a process through this, what's happened here, that the better outcomes for not only for this family and for our mokos here, but for everyone else in this community and throughout our country. We know that a lot of people say, and the police say, we're only doing our job. Okay, there's better ways of communicating.
Cheryl Martinga says the wider community is also angry about what's happened and it echoes too close to home for some.
We've had people come over home and talk about their experience and said that they wish that they had the courage to stand up to the police even though they were raided for nothing. They were found, nothing was found, yet their kids had to live through that.
The whānau are now considering their next steps and they say they deserve an apology from the police. I rahui pōkeka mō te hōtaka o te ata nei, ko Jesse Chang tēnei.
It's 6:26. Lawyer and activist Annette Sykes says the government should end pay disparity for Maori nurses. The Nurses Union says nurses working in Maori health organisations earn up to 25% less than those working for DHBs, and many have to juggle multiple jobs. Rowan Quinn reports.
Look out, 'cause here I come, and I'm marching on to the beat I drum.
An inspiring rallying cry to hundreds of Maori nurses from talented members of their ranks. Organisers of today's conference say they want to build an army of Maori nurses to help fight the disparities in the health system. But human rights lawyer Annette Sykes says many Maori nurses are facing inequities of their own.
It is racist for nurses who are working for Maori providers to be paid, and that's non-Māori and Pākehā, less than anybody working for a DHB.
She says the difference wasn't disputed by anyone and questioned why nothing had changed. Ms Sykes called on the Māori caucus to lead the charge for the government to make things right. And the Associate Minister of Health, Penny Henare, whose son's just graduated as a nurse, says the government is listening.
I'm working with the Honourable Nanaia Mahuta in making sure that the proposals we put forward for the wider government to consider around pay equity for Māori nurses and indeed the Māori health workforce are at the forefront of our agenda at the moment.
The New Zealand nurses organisation Kai Whakahaere, Kiri Nuku, says she wants the nurses gathered, including about 100 students, to leave with fire in their belly. Only 8% of nurses are Māori. Ms Nuku wants to double that and increase the voice for Māori in the health system. She says Māori nurses can bring the aroha from their culture to the whole health system and to everyone they care for. And Annette Sykes says Māori nurses and midwives are the ones at the coalface.
When I go to jail for suicide, it's the Māori nurses that are there with me doing the karakia. When I go into the hard-to-reach hui with the Mangara mob, the Black Power, the Highway 61s, and when we invite nurses from different practices to come, it's the Maori nurses that turn up.
The conference is continuing this weekend. I Tamaki Makaurau mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
Before we go tonight, a crowd has turned up at the world's most famous pedestrian crossing to mark the 50th anniversary of the day the Beatles created one of the best-known album covers in music history. Matthew Laratonda reports.
That iconic moment, that iconic album, that photo of the Beatles Abbey Road, one of the most famous music compilations of one of the most famous bands of all time, turned 50 years old on Thursday, and on that sacred street in London, the actual Abbey Road, throngs of tourists and fans blocked up traffic to have their own little crossing. It was an official 50th anniversary fan event outside Abbey Road Studios, which sits just a few feet away. The place has been a shrine for tourists for decades, though. It's even a protected historic site by the British government. Hundreds cross it every day, but this crowd is overwhelming even for peak summer. The picture of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr was taken by Ian McMillan, a Scottish photographer, and it said it only took him 10 minutes to get the shot. They recorded the album in the same studios. It would be the last album recorded by all four members of the band together. They split up less than a year later. Universal Music announced on Thursday that it will be releasing a 50th anniversary edition of the album. It goes on sale in September.
For tonight, have a great weekend.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A coroner says breastfeeding mothers should avoid drinking after finding that a baby's death was probably due to high levels of alcohol in her mother's milk. Packages of cocaine found on a West Auckland beach are believed to have been tossed overboard off the Australian coast last year. 19 people have been arrested after blocking train tracks in Christchurch as part of a coal protest. And passengers have praised the actions of a Wellington train conductor who stopped a train and rang the police over a racist taunt last night. Those are the headlines. Our next news is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
We're very proud of the lung cancer patients and their family members that have helped inform